This is the stuff of science fiction nightmares being reported in the New York Times. It's not something you haven't heard about before, but this is coming closer and closer to fruition, and that is, I guess, a sort of pun, but not a very appetizing one. Technologies that could enable two women or two men or four unrelated people of either sex to conceive a child together is already under development. I'll reread this to you. Now, note that the New York Times, in its headline, it says, I'm going to read it to you the way the New York Times has it. Technologies that could enable two women or two men or four unrelated people of any sex. It should be either because there are only two, male or female, but that would go against the New York Times worldview. So they say any, suggesting that, there are more than just two. So technologies that could enable two women or two men or four unrelated people of any sex to conceive a child together are already under development. They give an example. Anna and Nicole, 36 and 39 years of age, have been close friends since college. They each dated various men throughout their 20s and 30s. They had a smattering of romantic relationships that didn't quite work out. But now, as they approach midlife, both women have grown weary of the merry-go-round of online dating and searching for men who might or might not make appropriate fathers for the babies they don't yet have. Both Anna and Nicole want children. They want to raise these children in a stable, nurturing environment and to continue the legacy of their own parents and grandparents. So, ... they decided to have a baby that is genetically their own, and have that baby together. And you're saying, what happened? How does that happen? How does that even happen? Here's how. Such an idea may sound fantastical. Oh, it does indeed sound fantastical. But technologies that could enable two women or two men or four unrelated people of any sex, and I suppose down the road, maybe five dudes and a chicken, any combo is acceptable nowadays. It will allow them to conceive a child together. If these technologies move from the laboratory into clinical use, and the history of assisted fertility suggests that they can and they will, then couples, or rather co-parents like Anna and Nicole, are likely to reshape some of our most fundamental ideas about what it takes to make a baby and a family. Now, note that Anna and Nicole are not lesbians. Parents, if this is a topic that is not suitable for your younger children, then maybe for the next couple of minutes, just turn the radio down and come back. Fair warning, Anna and Nicole are not romantically involved with each other. They're just friends, the way women, have friendships. And they've dated guys, and they tried to get to the marriage thing, didn't work out for whatever reason. So they're going to have each of them provide the genetic material. Now, you may say, wait a minute, Anna and Nicole, that's two women. How's that possibly going to work? Because doesn't a man have to be involved? Well, here's how they're explaining it. Most major advances in assisted reproduction have been tweaks on the basic process of sexual reproduction. Artificial insemination brought sperm toward egg through a different non-sexual channel. IVF, in vitro fertilization, mixed them together outside the woman's body. Little things, really, in the broader sweep of life. Don't you love that little homey touch that the New York Times just tucks in there? Little things, really, in the broader sweep of life. Little things like the Frankenstein laboratory experiments where human beings are conceived in glass. That's what in vitro means. It's the Latin phrase in glass.
I don't think so.
I wish that were true, but more and more people are digging this. And yet, the New York Times says, even these have profound consequences. Humans are reproducing in ways that would have been truly unimaginable just several decades ago. Two men and a surrogate, two women and a sperm donor, an older woman using genetic material from a much younger egg. I will pause here. I've shared with you before, not often, but one or two times over the years, stories of grieving parents of a son who died. And in one particular case that I can remember, the son had died years and years ago. But they had asked for his genetic material, if you follow my meaning here, to be captured and preserved before his body was buried, so that with the use of a surrogate, they could conceive, in essence, a grandchild, or however you want to look at that. It boggles the mind. And they were successful in doing so. So they could have a little piece of their son back, is how they put it. Things first began to change in the 1960s. as a combination of shifting mores, accurate paternity tests, and greater access to contraception, prodded courts in the United States and elsewhere to expand the legal definition of parenting to include a genetic relationship regardless of marital status. Then, in the 1990s, as reproductive technologies became better and more widely available, the legal norms shifted again, allowing parents to be defined in many cases as those who had desired to create a child, regardless of either their marital status or the child's genetic origins. In other words, you may not have any genetic connection whatsoever to the child, but if you desired to be in the process of creating a child, in some legal rulings, you would be considered a parent. In the infamous case of baby M, a New Jersey judge ruled that a married couple who had employed a surrogate to carry their child had full parental rights to the baby, even though the surrogate was the child's genetic mother and had gone to extreme lengths to retain custody. Subsequent cases upheld and expanded this precedent, increasingly paying less attention to the underlying biology of a child's conception, whose eggs, whose sperm, whose womb, and more to the contractual terms that had initiated their birth. The most recent shift, and arguably, they say, the most crucial, occurred in 2015 when the Supreme Court of the United States famously extended the right of marriage to same-sex couples. The implications of this decision are well known, as is the long history of activism that prompted and preceded it. What's less well known is the role assisted reproductive technologies played in the fight for marriage equality, and some of these phrases maybe you want to put in quotation marks, because much of what drove the court's decision in the case of Obergefell versus Hodges was the right of the plaintiffs to give their children the benefits of being raised in a, quote, loving and nurturing home. And that's a quote, in quotes, in the article. Or, as the California Supreme Court similarly stated in striking down that state's ban on same-sex marriage, quote, a stable two-parent family relationship is equally as important for the numerous children in California who are being raised by same-sex couples as for those children being raised by opposite-sex couples. What the court didn't say was that the vast majority of these children had been conceived via assisted reproduction. In other words, IVF, or almost always IVF, but usually involving a surrogate. They were the children of technology, and it was the circumstances of their births that helped propel their parents' marriages. Urged by technology, therefore, we have already changed how we procreate and with whom. We have separated sex from reproduction. Does that sound like a good idea to you? It sure doesn't sound like a good idea to me. We have separated sex from reproduction and multiplied the various pairings that can go together to produce a child. And soon, a technology known as I.V.G, in vitro gametogenesis, we can just say I.V.G for short, in vitro gametogenesis, could push this process even further. In theory, I.V.G could allow individuals like our fictional Anna and Nicole to manufacture their own eggs and sperm, mixing and matching between genders and genes, and enabling more than two people to create a child together. Did you catch that? More than two people contributing their own genetic material to, quote-unquote, create a child, using the language in the article here. How many is more than two people? 3, 4, 5, 6, 10? I mean, come on, it takes a village, right? Maybe somebody will get that in their mind and say, why don't we have like a village baby? And we'll call them the village people. And they can sing songs about how great it is to have 500 or 1,000 parents, because now we can do that. Does that sound like a good idea to you? Here's how I.V.G works. The village people. I know Cyrus is busily scouring the files looking for something from the village people. I'm just guessing on that. Okay, here's how I.V.G works. Under natural conditions, the body produces gametes, eggs and sperm at puberty, taking non-differentiated stem cells with 46 chromosomes and instructing them to split into more specialized cells, each containing just 23 chromosomes. In young men, the process occurs, and we don't have to get into some of the more nitty-gritty here. In women, it takes place, blah, blah, blah. Both of these processes are known as gametogenesis. In vitro gametogenesis, therefore, is precisely that, creating gametes outside the body and in the laboratory instead. More specifically, over the past decade, scientists have begun to find ways of coaxing human stem cells to produce eggs and sperm. To put it more bluntly, I.V.G can theoretically allow anyone to manufacture an egg or sperm cell from a tiny sliver of their own skin, meaning not just 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, the village people. You can also do it by yourself. You can be mommy and daddy. Thus far, I.V.G has worked only in mice. Now, they say making the leap to humans will not be easy or straightforward. I doubt that seriously. I have a feeling it's much further along than we realize and than they're reporting. Not that they're withholding sensitive information. I just think that these things are much further along. I really do. Because if, in the minds of many people, if you can do it, go ahead and do it. So they're doing it in mice. They're saying, well, at some point, probably after a while, we'll be able to do. I have a feeling they're probably already really close to doing it, or maybe they're already doing it. And then, of course, they get into the obligatory question about, what about bioethics? And what about, the messiness of, how do we explain to some child, well, your friends, they have a mom and a dad. You don't. You have 4 moms and 5 dads. How do you explain that to a child? And on it goes. There's more to this, and there are links to some of the scientific data that underlie it. If you're interested, you'll find this posted on the show Twitter feed at P. Madrid Show. Here's why I'm sharing this with you. Not because I think that any of you are going to say, oh, okay, wonderful, let's go out and try that. No, normal people are not going to want to do that. It's a Frankenstein laboratory experiment. I'm bringing this to your attention because we are living in a time now when the dizzying capabilities of our scientific state of the art are not merely dizzying, but they're frightening. And the willingness of people to undertake these kinds of things and actually do them, not unlike the chimeras, where they're mixing the DNA of mice and human beings and pigs and human beings. Maybe you saw that picture that was making the rounds on Twitter and Facebook a few weeks ago about a fish. People were texting it to me as if I hadn't seen it before. A fish with human teeth. And the human teeth, the fish is smiling. It's like Mr. Limpet. If you ever saw that cartoon starring, what was it, Barney Fife. What was his name? The actor who played Barney Fife on the Andy Griffith Show. Don Knotts. The Incredible Mr. Limpet. It's an animated TV, well, part of it's animated TV show about this guy who falls in love with a fish. Okay. I don't know who came up with that plot line. He falls in love with a fish and he becomes a fish. And then the part where he's a fish, he's wearing glasses. It's like Don Knotts, the guy who played Barney Fife in the Andy Griffith Show, that guy. So he's now a fish. This is what I'm driving at here, is that they're doing this now. They're combining DNA. And when I saw the picture of this fish that was making the rounds on Twitter, and it had not only human teeth, they sure looked human. They looked like your teeth and mine, but they were straight. It was almost as if that fish had been to the orthodontist because the teeth were straight. You got to just look it up. Fish with human teeth. Look it up and you'll see it. It won't take you long to find it. Was that a product of the chimera experiments where they are mixing and matching DNA? Well, they're doing it in laboratories, so it's not that far-fetched to imagine that perhaps this crazy fish with a very straight, orthodontically corrected teeth may have, escaped from a lab, or somehow they flushed it down the toilet and then it makes its way into the wild. Who knows what happened? This is what's so insane about all of this. And it's happening. So what are people like you and me to do? Well, watch and pray. That's what Jesus says. But anyway, watch and pray. Notice the signs of the times, he says. Be aware. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So all the things, if you ask the question, what would Jesus do? Well, he's already told us what to do. I would also encourage you, and I use this story as a backdrop to this further point, and that would be, I would encourage you, parents especially, not only for yourselves to be knowledgeable, at least sufficiently knowledgeable about these matters, but to start talking to your children about some of this insanity. Some of the things that my parents never had to talk to me about because it didn't exist. I didn't have to talk about these things with my children back in the 80s. These things didn't exist. They exist now. And the speed of the state of the art improving, and I don't mean improving necessarily in a good direction, but refining enhancing, improving. The speed with which it's doing that is accelerating. There's a good book. It's called The Singularity is Near. This is written, I don't know, 10, maybe 15 years ago, something like that. Ron Kurzweil, I believe is his name. Ray Kurzweil or Ron Kurzweil, something like that. And he's a big muckety-muck at Google. He's one of their top people. He did his degree at MIT. And he's not a religious guy, as far as I can tell. He's like a futurist. He believes in technological and biological evolution. All right, so he's really knowledgeable in his field. And in this book, The Singularity is Near, he explained to people down at my level who don't have all that scientific knowledge, and we're not encumbered by all that genius baggage that he's got. So he was able to dumb it down for people like me to explain how this is happening. I'll give you just a quick example. And he gives this comparison. Okay, so take, let's say, the year 1. So Jesus is a little boy in the year 1. And go from the year 1 to the year 1000. So AD 1000 now. In that 1,000-year span of time, if you were to consider what changed, what new enhancements, what new discoveries were made in the realm of science, you would have more or less a flat line, virtually nothing. So how did people move around at the time of Jesus? Horses, ox-drawn carts. They walked. They had donkeys. How did they stay warm? They lit fires. How did they fight? They had swords and clubs. Okay, go 1,000 years into the future. How did people get around? Horses, ox-drawn carts, donkeys. They walked. How did they fight? Swords, clubs. How did they stay warm? Fire. So in that 1,000-year span of time, virtually nothing of any major significance took place in terms of human ingenuity leading to new technology. Now go forward from the year 1000, go forward 500 years. So now you're in the year 1500. A lot has taken place in that period of time, not only in the arts, but also in technology, new discoveries. But when you think about it, life in 1500 was not that much different in terms of quote-unquote technology. It really wasn't that much different from how life was in the year 1000. There were a few improvements, modest improvements, but they still used carts and horses and swords, and they were still at that level. Okay, now go like 100 years into the future. So now 1600. So what happened? Printing press. Oh my gosh, look, now we don't have to hand copy things. Now we don't have to rely upon these monks who lived out their lives in obscurity in these medieval monasteries, hand copying, not just Bibles, but books of all sorts, making sure that the wealth of human knowledge was made available for future generations, because that's the only way you could do that. You could only transmit these things by hand copying them. And then all of a sudden, boom, the printing press. Invented by a Catholic, by the way, Johann Gutenberg, FYI. And by the way, in case somebody's ever hassling you about, well, Catholics don't read the Bible. You know what the very first book was that Gutenberg printed on his printing press? It was the Bible. In any case, so then you have the printing press. Suddenly now you see this incredible proliferation of scientific advancement, and it's happening now at a much more, a much quicker interval. So by the time you get from the invention of the printing press, now you go forward to, let's say, to the year, I'm going to say, 2000 or 2000, okay? In that 500-year period, roughly, now the speed of everything has increased blindingly. We have computers. We're putting people on the moon. We're doing all of these things that we could never even dream about doing before. And what Kurzweil does, this is the whole thing I'm trying to say to you. What Kurzweil does in this book, The Singularity is Near, is he explains not only how this happens, but how much faster it's going to happen going forward, because of the speed of computing power and the miniaturization, nanotechnology now, being able to devise cellular level, molecular level machines, creating machines that are at the size of molecules and introducing them into the body, for example, to clear up, let's say somebody had gout, just to pull something out of the air. You send one of these nanobots into the big toe and suddenly you don't have gout because these nanotechnology machines were able to fix it. So the speed at which things are traveling now and developing it's truly quantum, and it's going to get quantumer and quantumer, as Ron Kurzweil says, and I believe him because there's seemingly no limit on these things. So back to my point: be at least adequately familiar with these things, and talk to your children about them. It's like back in the day, you'd have the drug talk with them. Just say no to drugs. You'd have the birds and the bee talks with your kids. You'd have other talks, don't smoke. And now we got to have this talk to explain to our kids, here it comes. I knew the Village people were going to come. I knew it. I mean, it's irresistible. Have a talk with your kids. I'm coming right back to your phone calls right after this. You're listening to The Patrick Madrid Show on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
For more of The Patrick Madrid Show, visit relevantradio.com/Patrick.